Hi, fantasy readers. This is Karyne Norton, your fellow book binger, and you are listening to the Finding Fantasy Reads podcast, where you can test out a new fantasy story every single week to find your next favorite author. This next story is another epic fantasy that's split over 2 episodes. It has unique magic, but also walks the line of real-world heartache with threads of hope woven throughout. It's written by R.M. Krogman, an epic and dark fantasy author from Iowa. Rebecca's debut novel, Liberation, is the first volume of a larger story set in Midgate, a medieval-inspired world of magic, mermaids, and wyverns. She has been developing the Keepers of Midgate epic since she was in high school. Surprisingly, the main storyline has changed little since then, only gaining more clarity and detail as the characters take on a life of their own. The world has grown in its depth of history, culture, and geography, spawning numerous side stories, prequels, and a sequel. Today's story is one of those prequels. Stick around to the end or check out today's show notes to see where you can find more from the author. For now, please enjoy Whisperer, Part 1 by R.M. Krogman. Chapter 1. Wayfarer. Lyra dusted the frayed section of her skirt, spying the bloodied knee beneath pink-patched fabric, and regretted who she was. Mem clicked her tongue. Now, sweet Benishel. She used the term of endearment reserved only for Lyra. Leave it alone until we get to camp. I'll clean it up. She tugged Lyra onward, her steps seemingly unhurried in their grace, and yet quick enough to promptly leave the village square behind. But why did they push me? Lyra managed, stifling a gasp as her clothing rasped against the raw skin. I thought we were only playing. But she was fairly sure she knew the answer. Mem was quiet until they reached the edge of the village, where she slowed. With a heavy sigh, she knelt to look Lyra in the eye. Sometimes, oftentimes, people only want to play with others they know. Sometimes people are afraid of those who are new or different from them. Lyra stared, bewildered. Everyone they met on the road was new and different. That's what made their lifestyle so exciting. She puzzled through her mother's words. But then how would they make new friends? A strange smile stretched across Mem's face. They don't. Because we're not townspeople? Lyra searched her mother for the clues she knew were there. The subtle crease between dark blonde brows, the squint of worry wrinkling the corners of her eyes, the tautness of her full lips. Mem was the most beautiful woman in the world. Even in her short years, Lyra had traveled very far with the caravan. From Lidus to Aucklim to Marlamet, and in all the villages and cities, she had never seen anyone to rival Eliza Ulmaskalon. Mem was tall and elegant, eternally framed by a reddish halo of hair, as though she were stepping to center stage. Her voice was smooth as the silk of her performing skirts, her movements nimble, and her bearing proud. Music seemed to dance around her, and maybe it really had given her gift of magica. Mem nodded once in solemn affirmation. Because we're not townspeople. Yes, Benishel. Will they ever be my friends? Maybe next time we pass through? Despite Lyra's knowledge, they were wayfarers and they didn't belong. She wanted to retain a small amount of hope. The children in the village had seemed like they enjoyed games, and they looked no different than she. Besides, having friends seemed different and more exciting than being surrounded by her cousins all the time. Mem's countenance lightened, and her smile became genuine. She cupped Lyra's chin and leaned forward until their noses just touched. You should always offer kindness. She leaned away, her voice tightening once again as she stood straight. But friendship is a two-sided bargain. You cannot trust everyone to return it. Trust in your family, Benishel. for they will never abandon you. Trust in the caravan." Lyra followed Mem past the outer ring of wagons, waving instinctively at Cousin Ada as they passed the horses. Something about Mem's answer grated against her heart, like the gravel on her skinned knee. It stung like a fly bite. The Moskalon caravan was her entire family, a traveling collective of uncles and aunties, of cousins and cousins' cousins. They would sacrifice anything for each other, and often did when someone encountered hardship. When Papa had been taken away, the aunties had comforted Mem and Lyra, and Uncle Eldo had assumed leadership of the caravan. Mem and Lyra had grieved for one full moon, selling no songs or leather or potions, and the caravan had provided. But that didn't fix the unfairness of Papa being arrested. It didn't fix the way people stared mistrustfully at the Moskalon when they lumbered by with their wagons and wares, or the way her family was refused the chance for high temple worship or formal education. It didn't fix the fact that Lyra had been shoved to the ground for trying to play with other children her age. Mem lifted her into the back of their wagon and settled her on a bench, then lifted the tattered skirt edge over Lyra's bloodied knee. She tisked again and put her hands on her hips. "We'll have to wash it, then get some salve to prevent scarring." Magic salve. The Moskalon were good with spells and potions, expert herbsmen and women. Lyra stared at the filthy knee. "It's because we're magic, isn't it?" Mem busied herself pouring water on the wound. "Magica is a gift, Benishel. Don't ever forget that." "But people hate us." "That's their choice. Magica is a gift from the five-faced god, one to be used to help others and make the world better. The Moskalon are talented in both low and high magica, and we must always recognize the honor in that, even when others don't." Lyra winced as Mem's ministrations grew too rough. It felt as though she were digging bits of gravel out with a dull knife. Mem continued, her tone shifting to lecture. "We have wandered for generations, keeping the magica strong like our faith. Because of this, we are uniquely gifted with air. It does make us different than the townspeople, but that difference is a good thing, a powerful thing. When you get older, you may be a whisperer like me. You may even do more, like my brother. If it is the will of the five-faced god, then you will be blessed." She turned away to search the drawers for healing salve, leaving Lyra to ponder her scraped skin and hurt heart. "I hope I'm not," Lyra whispered. Chapter 2. Air Dragon. After that less-than-friendly village, the Moskalon caravan trod westward, their backs to the Latesian plains. The road meandered with the coast of Lamper's Bay, a gentle, sloping landscape of high-quality roads, until one reached the distal edges of Sukrat wilderness. Thin forested fingers extended from the Sukrat mountain ranges that rose far to the west. Lyra had never liked the constriction of the encroaching forest after the openness of Litis. The hills darkened with thick timber in place of wispy, waving grasses, and the intermittent lines of stacked rock fence petered out. Towns still popped up along streams and on hilltops, and the coast still boasted fishing villages. But overall, the land felt desolate. Uncle Eldo didn't seem to like it either, for he moved his whisperers further ahead and behind, and he seemed more irritable than usual. Only two things were to be found in the rough terrain of Litis's border to Marlamet: dragons and bandits. Both prospects frightened Lyra, although she knew bandits were supposedly more dangerous than the mighty creatures of the sky. But knowing something and knowing something were different. and all she knew was that dragons and their keepers were strange. They made her uncomfortable. She shifted on the bench beside Uncle Eldo, who led the main caravan with as much authority as Lyra recalled Papa having. Eldo first glared at the dappled light of the trees overhead, then squinted ahead. "Should open up soon," he grumbled. "We're nearly to the trading meadow. I'd expect a message from—" He paused, cocking his head as though hearing a voice. Lyra waited quietly, familiar with the habit. Eldo had received a whisper, likely from an outrider who ranged far ahead. If she spoke aloud, she might interrupt his receipt of the message, and he would berate her for her thoughtlessness. Eldo cleared his throat. "Tell your mother to pass the message along. There are dragon keepers awaiting trade." "Yes, Uncle Eldo." Lyra climbed to the rear of the carriage and signaled through the window to her mother, who guided the next wagon in the long train. Eliza signaled her understanding back. She would whisper the update to other family leaders, spreading the news through the entire caravan long before they reached the open meadow of which Eldo spoke. Satisfied, Lyra clambered back onto the front bench. "Uncle, do you ever wish you could whisper?" Eldo snorted, but then rubbed at his grizzled red beard. "Maybe, but what's wishing good for? Gifting comes as it does, and we all contribute in our own way." He eyed her askance. "You want to be a whisperer?" Lyra strove to meet his regard with bravery, but her stomach curdled at the thought. No. Those with air magica were often able to craft magical messages that flew from one end of the caravan all the way to the other. Whispers. Some people, like Mem, could send their whispers even further, from their caravan to the next town, or to the other wayfaring families on the road. These individuals became the forward and rear scouts on dangerous tracks, as well as the heralds who announced the Moscalan family's arrival to a new place they hoped to perform or set up shop. Lyra was glad Mem's job was to stay with the caravan, relaying decisions back to the scouts. Whisperers seemed like they were most honored among the Moscalan, but Lyra couldn't help but notice the way townspeople wrinkled their noses or pursed their lips sometimes. Lyra finally dropped her eyes, her gaze landing on her knee. Though weeks in the past, the itch of memory remained. The village children didn't like her because of her family's magic. Even if she wasn't cursed with air, she was still corrupted with the stain of manipulative potions and evil elixirs. She was landless and honorless, like all wayfarers. She took people's money and conned them out of their valuables. The thoughts rattled around in her head, each in a different stranger's voice. Eldo put his arm around her shoulder in a brief hug, the extent of physical affection he ever showed. "Your gifting will be what it will be, and you'll do your best with it. Maybe you will find your strength is leatherworking, or maybe you'll have an eye for the finer jeweling. Kyra could always use a hand with potions, too. Try not to be disappointed regardless, for we all have our purpose." The trees thinned, and they emerged to a large open area. The wild secretion forest receded to the western foothills, leaving a long plain with nothing but a shallow brook meandering through it, and a lone structure of stone. 3 figures lounged in its shade. Keepers. But more intimidating were the 3 shapes hunched beyond. Air dragons. Their finely feathered bodies gleamed in the sun, almost iridescent like ravens' wings. Instead of black, they shone azure. One raised its bulky head to stare at Lyra. Arching back, the dragon stretched its wings in a lazy flap before settling with its head tucked into one side. Lyra released a shuddering breath, her nerves already climbing toward the clouds, and Eldo muttered soothing words to the hall beasts before urging them forward again. He guided the caravan to the eastern side of the plain, distancing the animals from the air dragons, and settled the wagons before gesturing to Mem and a few others. An envoy would greet the dragon keepers, who patiently waited at the remote structure. Lyra raised her eyebrows when Eldo waved at her, too.
Time to see how business works. If you're anything like your mother, you'll be a master of the deal one day. Watch and learn.
But he snapped his fingers, and she obeyed, falling in line behind the small group of family leaders as they marched into the grass. A sense of dread hovered over her like a thundercloud. Twice, her shoes caught in the twisted grasses, and the closer they came to the dragons and their keepers, the harsher her breath came. The details of the structure resolved to individual stones and pale sun-baked mortar. The keepers turned from dark silhouettes to riders in black, each with a bandana hanging round their neck and ridiculous goggles pushed up on their brows. Latesian glass, Ma'am said they were, and difficult to get in the wilderness unless you knew a good wayfaring caravan. Their outfits were likewise of wayfaring origin, hardy leather jackets and boots. The buttons and sewing of one rider were clearly of Mascalon design. Uncle Eldo stepped forward with a familiar greeting, but Lyra hardly heard the conversation. Never had she come this close to a dragon. The 3 air dragons' bulks rose up behind the structure, and though their wings had been tucked and their long tails wrapped, they filled her vision. Something inside her cracked. Instead of dragons, 3 fountains of energy flared bright as the lightning, pulsing until her comprehension suddenly wavered. They radiated power in such overwhelm, she felt she might choke. The spring sky paled in comparison to their colors. Their minute feathers, slick smooth over delicately boned bodies, glimmered in shades of navy and hues of periwinkle. One had the cast of those rare spring wildflowers that popped through the leaf litter weeks before everything else, and another had an especially dark spray of feathers that formed a spiky crown just behind its skull. That one, perhaps interested in the novelty of visitors, pulled its head from its wing and inspected her with opalescent eyes clouded by sleepiness. A few blinks, and its eyes turned as entrancing as the rare sapphires procured from Oclemian traders. At the same time, a roaring seemed to flood her ears, the rumble of 1,000 wagons. It was everywhere and nowhere. Lyra could hardly breathe. What's happening to me? Everything about these glorious creatures screamed of the heavens, of the eternal power of the wind and the endlessness of summer days. They seemed pure and fresh and good. They were unbearable as staring at the sun, and she was forced to look away. She stumbled, and once on her knees, she gasped, nearly retching as Magica blanketed her, suffocated her, wrapped around her like a strangling rope. Fear cinched the rope tighter. She could feel the air. No, no, no. I don't want to be a whisperer. Please, I don't. Mem had not prepared her for this. She was too young. Children didn't show their gifting until they got bigger and started looking like adults. Is this what it's supposed to feel like? She wrangled her mind into discipline, imagining Uncle Eldo snapping his whip over the hall beasts. Stand up and walk, she commanded her body. It obeyed too slowly, and Mem was already beside her. Are you all right, Benishel? Mem searched her face, cupping her cheek and then touching her forehead as though searching for fever. Lyra nodded, shoving her terror down, and straightened. I tripped, she mumbled, but she couldn't keep her gaze from returning to the air dragons. Magnificent, oppressive, beautiful, terrifying. Don't be afraid. They will never harm a human, nor will their keepers. Mem squeezed her arm before letting go, and then Lyra was alone again. She hovered behind the adults in the envoy, straining to focus over the strange thunder on Eldo's words and the Dragon Keeper's replies. Commodities were discussed and bargains were struck, but there was no denying it or ignoring it. She had Magica. People they met along the road would never see her as one of them. She was too different. How would she make friends now? Several whispers flew from Mem's lips, emerging like strings of light that intertwined into shapes, then leapt to the sky to zoom toward the caravan with their instructions. Lyra marveled, for she had never seen them before. They were like birds. Each one was different, its own manifestation of Mem's desires. Each carried its own words meant for a specific person's ears, and some were more substantial than others. Lyra guessed it depended on how long or important the message might be, although she couldn't hear them beyond the ethereal fluttering of their wings as they passed by. Her wonder slowly faded, for the reality continually niggled at her, tugging at the ragged edge of her skirts. "You're one of them," the voice said inside. "You're a whisperer. The townspeople will never want to know you better, and you will never have any friends beyond your family. You're a wayfarer, mixed up with dark magics. They do not want your kind around." Battling sorrow, Lyra clamped her lips tight. If she didn't tell anyone, she could have a chance at being normal. At least, as normal as a wayfarer could be. She would endure this, return to the wagon, and hide from the horrifying revelation of her air gifting. She leaned down and scratched at her knee. It itched. Chapter 3. Air Blessed. The caravan turned northward, edging around the boggy marshes of the westernmost river feeding Lamper's Bay. The forest crept forward again, encumbering the road edges with occasional roots and overgrown weeds. The wagon bumped over a particularly egregious growth from a hard-leaning maple, and Uncle Eldo grimaced. "Just a bit further on," he growled, "and we'll near the Marlamation border fort. They take better care of their roads." Lyra silently nodded, recognizing his sour mood. This was the worst part of the summer route. Far from any towns on the edge of two kingdoms, one wheel in marshland and the other in a tangle of forest. A narrow way ahead and a river ford behind, slowing any retreat. This was bandit territory, and their only boon besides blind luck was the watchful eye of an air dragon negotiated in trade. And numbers. The Moskalon were not few, and they were road-hardened and cautious. Still, a man like Uncle Eldo did not ascend to leadership without being careful. Lyra tried not to watch the occasional whispers that zipped to his ear from the outriders, though she saw them streaking through the trees, blinking between the trunks like fireflies on a midsummer night. She feigned ignorance until Eldo cocked his ear to listen. The whispers each landed lightly upon his shoulder and twittered, then burned away like morning fog. "I'm not a whisperer. I'm just a little girl. A normal little girl." Her ruse went smoothly until a movement caught her eye in the woods to their left. She stared. A flicker of power, dipping low in flight and careening into a dead-fallen branch. It clutched desperately to the wood, and Lyra realized the branch blocked a worn side road. The view beyond was open enough for a distance, but then became shrouded by undergrowth. She frowned and started from her seat as the whisper tumbled from the branch, listless and exhausted from its flight. "What is it?" Eldo asked. His wary inspection immediately found the track, and he furrowed his red brow. "See something?" Maybe." Lyra didn't want to admit she saw a stray whisper, but she couldn't lie to her own uncle. Should I go look?" Eldo reined the hall beasts to a halt. "I'll go with you." Lyra noted he grabbed his cudgel, and a sense of dread churned in her belly. Nonetheless, she jumped from the wagon. As she ran toward the flailing whisper, she debated herself. She could try to be subtle, to search the ground as though looking for a coin. She could turn around now and forget what she saw. She could tell Eldo she was mistaken, a lie. She had never been good at lying. By the time she collapsed to her knees by the whisper, she knew she would not be able to do that to Uncle Eldo. Lyra hesitated for only a moment, her heart quaking at the delicate things writhing. The whisper was dying out, the ethereal threads of its brief existence fraying. Its message would be lost. She cupped it in her hands and lifted it to her ear. "It's all right," she breathed. "I'll pass your message if I can." Did whispers understand such an offer? Did they die any more than they lived? They were nothing more than air. It dissolved with a sigh. "Help me. I'm the only one left." Lyra blinked away the sudden deluge of tears and stared toward the woods, even as Eldo grabbed her and demanded to know what was wrong. She heard herself telling him, and then a flurry of activity surged around her as a group of uncles rode forward. They broke the branch and tossed it aside, then disappeared down the side road with weapons drawn. Whatever lay ahead, bandits, ghast wolves, any threat, would fall to their air magicka and blades. They were gone for a long while. They returned somber. A young woman sprawled unconscious in Eldo's arms, and she was quickly transferred to Auntie Kyra's wagon for medical care. Lyra watched the transaction with awe, realizing the ragged whisper must have come from the woman before she capitulated to her injuries. How far had it tried to fly, looking for an ear? She jumped as Eldo placed a hand on her shoulder. He glowered down at her, but she thought maybe the anger wasn't for her. "You saved her life," he stated gruffly. "From what?" Lyra asked. Eldo's scowl drifted toward the woods. "Bandits. That road is a shortcut to Aucklim's South Duchy. They ambushed her group a few days ago and left her for dead. You saw her whisper, didn't you?" He scruffed his beard in thought. "Lyra, you are young to be seeing whispers already, and to make one talk to you without explicit instruction. You will be strong. You can save others with that kind of skill, as you did today." He took her measure, and she straightened her shoulders somewhat at the glint in his eyes. Was that pride? He continued, "You will ride with Eliza for lessons, and eventually learn to scout ahead with the Whisperers, once we reach open ground in Marlamet. No more riding at ease with me, for you have much to learn." He didn't wait for her acknowledgement, leaving her staring after him, twisting her fists into her skirt. Her palms sweated, and her throat was dry. Uncle Eldo was impressed and already making plans for her place in the caravan, but she didn't know whether she even wanted it. She looked once more toward the side road where the young woman's whisper had faded away. This was it. Life or death. A curse or a gift. Magicka is a gift to be used to help others and make the world better, Mem intoned in her mind, but Lyra wasn't sure she believed it yet. She sighed. She was a whisperer now, and everyone knew it. Mem sang praises to the five-faced god, for the rest of their passage out of Litis was uneventful. With the Sucratian wilds behind them, their caravan trundled into the wide kingdom road of wealthy Marlamet. Though interspersed with waterways, southern Marlamet was also strewn with bridges, and its landscape was open to the sky in many places. Lyra took it in a lungful at a time. The overwhelm was like being near the air dragons. She was not only swimming in her element, but drowning in it half the time. Sometimes she was busy enough to forget, but it was always there in the background. Mem didn't seem to notice through her own rosy enthusiasm, so eager was she to teach. Since Mem had realized what happened, she had been beaming non-stop. "So young," she crowed with pride. "My air-blessed baby. Oh, how strong you will be." Now they sat around a cozy fire, wagons pulled round to form concentric circles in an open pasture outside a small town on the Marlamation coast. Mem had drawn her lute from its case and now strummed it in a wild dance of joyous chords. Lyra sat beside her, enthralled by the music as never before, for she saw now that the air truly did caper around Mem as she'd imagined. It vibrated from the pluck of Mem's fingers and wavered outward in a shimmer. It swirled in rhythm to her song, and it seemed to carry Mem's bright-eyed emotion along like a paper boat on water. Lyra watched in wonder, her senses ablaze and sparking. The young woman they had rescued, Mina, sat beside her, bobbing her head to the music. She smiled wistfully at Lyra. "My aunt used to play too," she said, "and my uncle was a master with pipes." Mina had lost her travel companions, an aunt, 2 uncles, and 5 cousins. They had been heading to Auckland in advance of her family's caravan when waylaid, but she had made no indication of completing that journey soon. Auntie Kyra had declared she must rest at least 2 more weeks. Mina would never be safe traveling alone at her age in any case, so Uncle Eldo had suggested she remain with the Moskalon until they might cross paths with her own family. "Mina, do you see the air dancing?" Mina stilled, watching Mem intently, and gave a slight nod. "A little. Like your mother is a spirit in a dream." She resumed bobbing her head, then stopped and stared at Lyra. "Do you know how to dance?" Lyra shrugged. "Some of my family does, and some of them play music. But Uncle Aldo says we need only draw attention, and then make our profits with our wares." Mina hummed. "My caravan specializes in entertainment, so we get called to particular cities for particular events. Festivals, big weddings, that sort of thing." She dimmed. "That's where we were heading, to broker a new agreement for the summer solstice." Lyra stared at the older girl. Mina was a new woman, only a few years older than she, and Lyra admired everything about her. Her raven hair starkly contrasted with Lyra's blonde curls, and her skin was the darker, sunshine-kissed tan of Auckland. She had lean, powerful legs and a nimbleness that exceeded even Mem's steps, a silence and purposefulness to her movements. Lyra's older cousins had all seemed to pass through a gawky teenage state, when their limbs flung outward and they became very rebellious and silly. Some seemed like unbroken colts, throwing tantrums until their aunties and uncles reined them back in with a stern word and whiplash. Mina displayed none of that. She seemed so sophisticated, so knowledgeable of roads and terrains Lyra didn't know. Maybe it was merely that Lyra had only seen her sad, and so she seemed more like an adult. Now she stood, offering both hands to Lyra with light flickering in her eyes. "Come, little sister, let us dance." "I don't know how to dance like you," Lyra began, but Mina, being bigger and stronger, yanked her up. "If you can see the air, you can learn." She laughed as Mem executed a complex melody, the start of a new song that demanded drums and reeds. A cheer went up from the family, more instruments appeared in hands, and more voices joined into the chorus. Mina dragged Lyra to an open space and spun her in circles. "Nothing fancy or structured or choreographed," she declared. "You simply feel the music all around you, and you wend your way through it." Now she spun Lyra out and drew her back in one smooth motion, twisting at the last moment to send her out the opposite direction. Lyra cried in surprise and giggled, then spun inward once more. Mina pulled their hands together, then swayed in a traditional dance Lyra recognized. They danced, both laughing with joy as they felt the music rise and envelop them. Lyra spun in wild cadence, half her steps learned and half invented. It was not a beautiful performance, but it felt beautiful. When she and Mina finally collapsed in a fit of giggles, she stared up at the night sky. So much open space, and all of it air. The vibrato of Mem's voice, the banging of drums and clamor of tambourine, the rumble of Eldo's voice and the humming of Cousin Ada. All of it was air in motion. The smoke wafting up from the fire was carried on a heated draft of its own making, sooty enough to make her nostrils twitch with a sneeze. The musk of the hall beasts and the green of cropped grass, the droppings of the horses and the lingering scent of supper's stewed rabbit. All of it was air imbued with its experiences in the world. And above, in the depth of night, the eternal space of clouds and stars and a distant wind that now roared in her ears. The laughter died in her throat, and she rolled toward Mina with tears stinging her eyes. Mina made a face. What's wrong? Does it ever stop? What? The thunder. Mina's lips thinned. Thunder? What is it you hear? The overwhelm returned, and this time Lyra didn't bury it as she had with the dragons. She sobbed. Everything, Mina. You can't hear it too? Mina shook her head. I hear the lilt of your mother's singing, the swell of sound that surrounds this camp like a bubble. And I suppose I hear a faint breeze blowing the clouds across the sky. Her eyes widened. You hear more than that? Lyra squeezed her eyes shut, praying it would shudder out the sound. It didn't. Chapter 4. Trial. Lyra rode her mother's mare alongside one of the rear whisperers, her uncle, Terraza. Terraza managed the animals, ushering the spare horses and hall beasts with a deft hand and gentle voice. He carried no whip, for he could lash the air with a smart flick of his fingers. He had done so on her rear enough times when she was younger, and he still did it to the cousins who labored too slowly at chores. His small corrections even touched her little brother, Elton, whose chubby toddler fingers would get into pockets in search of sweets. Terraza rode a dapple-gray horse with pristine white socks. He had spent the last hour crafting several whispers, which had hopped about on various assignments. The horse, fully acclimated to his activities, ignored the flutters of air displacing its braided mane and whistling past its ears and plodded on. Your riding form is fairly good, Terraza remarked absent-mindedly. But you'll need to learn to guide her with your legs more, freeing your hands for magic. Can you form a whisper with only your voice? Lyra asked. Certainly, he grinned, but most of us find it easier to gesticulate. Forming a thought and forming a whisper have different levels of physicality. He paused at her confused expression. All manipulation of magicka, regardless of element, is somewhat like a dance, a shifting in rhythm, with the inherent cadence of nature. So it is not only whispers, but any air magicka that can be achieved by attuning to that rhythm, aloud or not. Your mem is especially talented at affecting the air without overt hand gestures. Realization dawned on Lyra. Her music? Yes. You can see it now, can't you? Terraza's grin was lopsided. Eliza always had the most talent with playing. I think she sees more, feels more, like you. Lyra swallowed hard. She didn't need a constant reminder, for the roaring had not stopped. Like Mina, Terraza didn't seem to hear the same thunderous power ripping across the sky, although he said he vaguely remembered noticing more sounds when he first grew into his magicka. Watch now, and this time try to copy my movements, Terraza said, oblivious to her distress. He drew his hands through the air, pulling at it as a weaver pulls thread. Lyra imitated him, feeling slight spurts of pressure as his air magicka pushed her fingers into the correct places. His encouragement cloaked her from the distractions of the world, and she narrowed her focus on the air between her palms. Good, Lyra. His soft voice echoed in her ears, though she wasn't sure he had really spoken aloud. He continued giving instruction, and she diligently followed his demonstration. When he pulled more power into the crafting, she tried to do so too. When he spoke, she spoke, informing her whisper of the desired message. It was a greeting to Cousin Ada, who guided a wagon of tack and stable supplies just behind them. Her creation was a weak, malformed echo of a whisper. Threads unraveled from it like straggles of wind-blown hair, and power wept out. She whimpered in frustration, once again sensing the ire burning on her cheeks. "It's all right, Benishal," said Uncle Terraza. "Bolster its wings with more power. Rebuild it." She shoved more air into the collapsing thing, but panic won over. It burst apart. "I can't do it," she complained, wishing he would let her stop. "I don't want to do it," she thought, "but also I can't. Don't we have enough whisperers anyway?" Terraza grew stern. "We must always do our best." He reached over and massaged the broken air in her hands to a soft fog, dispersing its power. It made Lyra feel a little better, for the misshapen whisper seemed like it suffered. "We must use the gifts we have to the best of our ability," Terraza continued, "and that means learning and practicing with a mind open to possibilities. We do not know of what you are capable, but your mam and I can both whisper very long distances compared to most. I came into my power young, too. There is a very good chance, Lyra, that you will be capable of more than whispers. You may be a caravan guardian, using magicka to stave off bandits or bears, or you may enchant with your music like Eliza." "I don't want to fight," said Lyra staunchly. "I want to dance, like Mina does." Terraza chuckled lightly. "Mina could likely teach you many new songs and dances from her family, and I'll bet your mam and you will make a great team. Now, let's try that whisper again." They practiced intermittently through the long hours of travel as the caravan rolled its way north. The exercises tired Lyra, but they also allowed some reprieve from the barrage of sensations encountered along the way. Every blooming bush, brackish pool, and animal dropping had a scent, and some left a faint taste on her tongue. The towns and villages were worse, mouth-watering baking bread interspersed with wastewater, incense drifting from the temples of Ea, the five-faced god, mixed with acrid metal from the blacksmith's forge. Lyra constantly coughed, sneezed, or gulped down nausea. Every time they settled outside a new town, she prayed they were upwind. She stayed in the camp, her desire to meet other children dampened, and instead shadowed Mina. Mina would sometimes play games with the cousins, but more often she wanted to explore or make music. She had a high, breathy singing voice, and she taught Lyra several new dances, each with its own personality and story. Some were silly, aimed at entertaining young families, and others were bawdy, meant for late nights of drinking and revelry. One was slinky and seductive, making Lyra giggle so hard she rolled on the ground while Mina glared. "It's supposed to make men empty their pockets," Mina declared, hands on her hips. Lyra looked at her cousin Ada, who stood nearby brushing one of the horses and humming along with their music. He was older, but still a man. Elton clambered over his boots, playing his own game of tugging Ada's laces out and laughing hysterically. "Does it work, Ada?" she called. He merely grunted, gesturing his thoughts to himself, and brushed the horse more intently. Lyra couldn't stop laughing at Mina's theatrical indignation, and the young woman finally slumped her shoulders in defeat. "Fine, maybe it needs work, but someday," Mina waggled a finger, "someday we'll make the boys swoon with it, and then we can afford to buy pretty things. And honey cakes," Lyra added eagerly. Mina grasped her hands and swung her in a circle. "Exactly." The caravan remained near that town for several days, for the early summer weather turned. Gray clouds billowed off the ocean, damp and heavy with rain, and true thunder shattered the heavens for all to hear. It was almost a relief, for the uneasy sky and the pattering of droplets blocked out other sensations. Lyra spent her days with Mina, who grew increasingly bored. Finally, the storms petered out, and the sky lightened to a dull, still overcast. Mem and a company had gone into town for one last day of trade. Lyra opted to stay behind, despite the tediousness of waiting, because the town lay a distance off the Kingdom Road on the other side of a reeking bog of tepid water and stale mud. The smell didn't seem to bother anyone else. The sun crept upward, striving to break through the haze, and Lyra found herself sitting next to Mina on the edge of a wagon, chatting about nothing. Chores were done, and she had already spent far too much time and effort constructing a whisper that instantly wafted away to nothing. She huffed in frustration, and Mina nudged her. "You'll get it, little sister. It takes years to master a skill. That's what my papa always says." "Ma'am says that too," Lyra sighed. "But then she makes it look so easy, like she's not even thinking about it. And Uncle Terraza, when he commands the hall beasts, he mixes air magica and sounds so perfectly, I can't tell where one ends and the other begins." Mina shrugged. "He's an adult. He probably practiced a lot." Lyra leaned on Mina's shoulder. Since their fateful encounter, Mina had become closer than most of her cousins. But Lyra knew that eventually the caravan would turn west toward Auckland, and the chance of encountering Mina's family would grow. They would part as good friends, sisters at heart, and resign themselves to briefly exchanged whispers and a hurried wave as their respective caravans passed each other once every few years. Lyra hated the idea. "I wish I had a house," she mumbled. "What?" "I wish I had a house where any wayfarers could stop and rest, where they always knew they were welcome and could stay as long as they wanted, with a big fireplace and glowing lamps in the windows. Like an inn? A home, like the town people have." Mina snorted. "You have a home. It's just on wheels." She sobered and hugged Lyra with one arm. "I felt welcome with the Moskalon from the moment you rescued me. And who needs a fireplace when you have the coziness and company of a bonfire?" She hopped from the wagon. "Come on. You're not thinking straight. Too much magica practice with too few rewards. Let's go to the town and get pastries." Lyra hesitated at the thought of getting bullied again, but a quick visit in and out might be harmless, and the bog was worth weathering for something sweet. "All right, but we have to bring one back for Ada." They saddled 2 horses and headed out of camp. The town wasn't far, for they could see a thin white meander of smoke rising from over a low hill in the distance. But to reach it, they had to traverse a narrower path. It wound through the marsh between thick tufts of grasses and dark water, and over several streams with wooden bridges. Lyra held her breath as they passed some of the worst pools of gloomy, seemingly lifeless water with mucky bottoms. But she couldn't help gasping when Mina's horse stumbled at the base of a bridge, its hoof breaking through a rotten board. Mina slipped, falling from the saddle with a surprised cry. She knocked her head on the wooden railing as she went, then slid down with a crash of splintered wood and collapsed riverbank, disappearing from view. Lyra screamed, nearly twisting her ankle in the stirrup as she tried to dismount. She rushed to the edge of the bank and peered over the broken tangle of soil-covered roots. Up close, rot blackening the lumber revealed the bridge's poor condition. Its corner frame piece had given out, sending Mina tumbling down. The water wasn't far below, but the bank had eroded enough to make the climb difficult and muddy. Mina lay at the bottom, her filthy skirts submerged in the stream. She didn't move. "I'll get you out," Lyra cried, calling her horse over. She tied a length of rope to the harness, then scrambled down. Mina lay still, eyes dull, so Lyra tied the rope under her arms and ordered the horse to back up. She followed Mina's progress up the steep bank, noticing red staining her skirts. Panic began to set in by the time Lyra reached the top and hovered over her prone friend. Mina's leg, bent at a strange angle, bled freely from a long, jagged cut, and her head sported an egg-sized swelling. Her eyelids twitched in a dreamy, half-hearted blink. Lyra looked both ways along the road, too far from the caravan, too far from the town. Mina was bleeding a lot, and she was dirty. Lyra dragged her into the nearest pool, thinking to rinse the dirt from the nasty wound, but it wouldn't stop bleeding. She finally gave up and looked at the rest of Mina. Scratches covered the skin of her ankles and arms, and Lyra tried to rub those clean, too. She was afraid to touch the swelling on Mina's temple, although she splashed water on it. She tore her own skirt and wrapped it around Mina's leg, tying knot after knot, until the bandage took on a bulky, gaudy absurdness. Maybe that was enough to stop the blood until she could get Auntie Kyra. She arranged a horse's blanket over top. "I'll be back with help, Mina," she said. A weak sound made her pause. Mina had said something. She turned back. Mina's wide, unfocused eyes had thin tears streaking from them. "Don't leave me," she whispered, then seemed to fade into a daze again. Lyra buried her fists in her ruined skirt, clenching with anxiety. She fell to her knees beside Mina. "I won't." She set to making a whisper. She pulled from the air in desperate, violent yanks, crafting a terrible, sharp-lined creature with a hooked beak and harsh voice. But its body was barely put together, and her message evaporated the moment she let go. She tried again, trying to slow herself down, trying to hear the measured instructions of Uncle Terraza. The next whisper was better, but still only half-formed and fragile. Its wings broke apart as it desperately flapped from her hand. She began to cry. She couldn't do it. The sky roared calamity, and she felt suddenly so small, a blot of muddied pink over a lone body in the midst of a wickedly heartless landscape. She was nothing compared to the great power of the world, a pathetic, weak, ignorant nobody with inadequate knowledge to do anything that mattered. She couldn't even make a whisper to save her friend's life. She didn't know how long she cried, but eventually she tried again. The whisper failed to coagulate into something true, as did the next, but the third attempt yielded a small, sparrow-like being. Its chest seemed to expand with her call for help, and it cheeped back at her as though repeating instruction. Then it stretched its wings wide and struggled upward. Its wing beats were uneven, and it barely stayed above ground, but it labored away toward the caravan, intent upon its mission. "Hurry," Lyra thought. "Please make it to Kyra." At the edge of her sight, the whisper dipped low, its ethereal body hidden by the grasses, and she couldn't quite tell whether it had faded. She leaned over Mina and apologized, then cried all over again. I hope you enjoyed listening to Whisperer Part 1 by R.M. Krogman, narrated by Karyne Norton. If you want to read more by Rebecca, go to her website and sign up for her newsletters at rmkrogman.com/join, and you can choose which story to jump into next. If you loved Lyra, you'll want to follow her into the epic trilogy with a preview of the first novel, Liberation. This story is also part of an anthology called Wonder and Dragons, with fantasy short stories written by authors in the Midwest. I'll have a link for the anthology in the show notes as well, so you can check that out too. Whether you're new or a longtime listener, I'd love it if you left a review for the podcast. Even if it's short and sweet, it helps boost the podcast. Leaving podcast reviews can feel daunting because it's not something people do every day. So if you go to findingfantasyreads.com/review, I've got instructions and links to make it easy for you. As always, I will have links for all of those sites in the show notes. Thank you all for listening, and happy reading.